After 7 weekends of World Cup rugby, there are just 2 teams left standing. This Saturday night in the Stade de France, the All Blacks will take on the Springboks. And not only is the William Webb Ellis Trophy up for grabs, so too is the position as the most successful team in the history of the tournament. On the latest episode of the Left Wing podcast, we will be looking ahead to the big game on Saturday, reflecting on the semi-finals and talking about plenty more in between. Will Slattery here with you. I'm delighted to be joined by Luke Fitzgerald and Rúaidhrí O'Connor over in Paris. Jonathan Bradley will be joining us in just a couple of minutes. And Rúaidhrí, I might go to you first as the man over in Paris. You were there for the semi-final weekend. Obviously, with the absence of France, Ireland being out, maybe slightly different to what we had expected and hoped for. How would you kind of describe how the weekend unfolded, just being over there? Give us a little bit of a flavour of what that was like.
Yeah, it was very different. It was a very different feeling at the games. And someone, in fairness, made the point to me that like the weather isn't as good as it was when Ireland and France were here as well. So in and around the stadiums, there's less, I suppose, appetite for kind of gathering early and kind of people being at the bars around the grounds. But certainly going to the Stade de France, certainly on Friday night, it didn't feel like anywhere near as big of an event. There wasn't the same buzz as there have been at all the Ireland games. Certainly the France game, the 2 France games I attended there as well. There was this massive buzz through the city. In Paris, I'm sure you've been there for Six Nations game. Paris, like the atmosphere often gets lost because it's so big. Paris and London, you get that. Whereas when Ireland were here and when France were in a big game, you had it across the city. And in fairness, the South Africans have brought that as well. There's been a huge number of them over creating an atmosphere as well. So Friday was just a damn squib. There wasn't that many New Zealand fans there. There was pockets of Argentinian fans within the stadium, but it was a lot of neutral fans, a lot of French fans, a lot of Irish fans that made the trip, having bought tickets, in the hope that Ireland would be there as well. And it was a poor enough spectacle. Obviously, New Zealand played some decent stuff, but as a game, as a contest, it was nowhere near what the previous Saturday and Sunday had delivered in the quarter-final weekend. And New Zealand got the job done, obviously, but because there's so few of their fans over here, and the fans, New Zealand fans by their nature are not that. They don't generate great atmospheres at games either. It's not. It's just the way they follow or they do things in the stadiums. It just never really got going. Whereas Saturday was a proper event, a proper spectacle. Again, before the game, it wasn't the same kind of congregations around, but it was lashing rain, so it's kind of you can understand a bit more. But once we were in there, and once the game unfolded, and once it became a real live prospect that England could get there, they didn't have as many fans over as you maybe would expect England to have in a semi-final in France, where they can get there by train, by ferry, by flight. Certainly there was no sense of momentum and a late flurry of people trying to get over. There was a lot of French in the stadium, a big South African contingent. But once they got going, there was a great atmosphere on the ground, and it definitely wasn't as high quality a game as the previous week, but it was a proper contest, and it went down to it was. I guess of the 4 games that I've been to in the last 2 weeks, 3 of them have gone down to injury time with one team trying to get a score, which really is all you can ask for out of a contest in many ways, regardless of how you get there. If it's live in the final kind of few moments, that's pretty good. And like that was a proper game and a proper atmosphere, and it was great to be there for it. So that's kind of how it unfolded. Certainly, even the French reaction to Ben O'Keefe and their interjections and these defiant renditions of the La Marseillaise, there's a mutinous feel to them. I don't think they're really they're still annoyed about how they've gone out, and they're not that. I don't think they're that. I don't know. There wouldn't be a positive relationship with the tournament anymore, but they're still coming, and they're making the atmosphere in their own ways, which is kind of weird. So it's been very different.
Yeah, it's a good point you make about how it can get lost a bit in Paris and London because of the size. Because I agree with you. Like the weekend I was over for the quarterfinals, Irish fans everywhere. Like no matter where I went in Paris, doing a bit of sightseeing by the Eiffel Tower or whatever I was doing, there was loads of Irish jerseys, and even South African
romantic photos with respective other halves, etc.
Very romantic photos. Yeah, right. That's a key part of going to Paris, Luke. I had to make some concessions to get over there for the weekend. Even
really annoying. Couldn't get a good snap of me and the missus with all the Irish jerseys around the Eiffel Tower.
Yeah, I saw Peter Stephen Toy was going for a walk by the Eiffel Tower with his wife as well, so I was in good company. But yeah, it was a good point you made. Like there was, and South African fans too. To be fair to them, Rúaidhrí, I agree with you. I was seeing loads of South African jerseys all across the city as well, so they have come in great numbers. They'll obviously be there on Saturday night. Rugby wise, Luke, from the weekend, the South Africa England game was fascinating. It was kind of best case scenario for me in the sense that we got a very compelling semi-final, but we still get the final that we kind of want, the blockbuster, the matchup in the final. The way it unfolded, like England's approach, it got them so far, but not quite far enough. Like, what's your kind of analysis of how the game unfolded and why it ultimately ended the way it did?
I'd say the weather conditions. You can't really. I don't think I can go on and say that. That wasn't a major factor in why the match was so close. So I start off there. I think that made defending things an awful lot easier. And England have really struggled to prize teams apart in attack. We know that's still a struggle for them. But leaving that aside, I mean, the defensive effort was excellent. I thought they kicked brilliantly. I thought Freddie Stewart coming back in was a smart decision, and it worked well with those conditions as well, because South Africa were going to go to the air too. I thought their line-out defence, particularly the maul defence, was outstanding throughout the game. So they kind of nullified a lot of South Africa's big weapons, and they kind of attacked them in key areas. And again, the defence was brilliant in a day when, it was always going to be difficult to break teams down with with running rugby, So that was probably why I think the game was so close. But you have to give credit. I mean, I thought they were very well organised. I think Borthwick looks like he's probably justified keeping him on at least for another year or two, I think, to give him time with the project. I think he did mention the age profile of his guys, and there is some young guys in that team too. So I was quite pleased for him. I think he's come in, they've come under an awful lot of scrutiny, and rightfully so. They haven't been playing great rugby, but I don't think also he's had great amount of time, and he's had this kind of pressure of the World Cup in the background. Plus, I think Eddie Jones left him with an absolute bag of, I'm going to say excrement because we're live here. But yeah, I think he left him, with a really difficult situation. And I was pleased for him. I'm pleased for the group who've taken a lot of stick that they put in a big performance in the semi-final. And really, they probably should have won the thing. And we'll go into into that a little bit further. But on the other side of the coin, I think Rassie again got bailed out of some bad selections. I think Pollard coming on after 35 minutes, what was he doing off the pitch in the first place? That never makes sense to me. That to my mind was probably the difference in the game. Even though Libbok didn't miss a kick when he was on, it just wasn't a day for him. And I just think he's not. Pollard is a polished international out half, and that is there is such a thing as that. He's got the experience, semi-final of a World Cup. Madness to have him sitting on the bench. So the situation called for a drastic, rethink. I'd say he was lucky enough that didn't happen later in the game, that it wasn't closer, because I think the game could have got away from them, particularly when they got that yellow card without Pollard on the pitch. He just kind of calmed things down, I thought. Even though he wasn't unbelievable in the rest of the game, I just thought there's a proper international out half, in my opinion. So it was a great day. It was enthralling. I was really good for the English guys, but I do think to tie off the points, South Africa New Zealand is definitely the final that we wanted after those two quarterfinal wins by the teams. It's the best game possible, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And as I said at the start of the show, the winner gets to take their place as the only four-time champion. Thus far, Jonathan, delighted to have you with us as well. Luke touched on it there. I do feel like South Africa, great team. Great coaching staff, very innovative, but I feel like they're playing catch up from some bad selection decisions when they initially picked their squad. And a lot of the things that have gone right for them, not a lot, but some of them have been them bailing themselves out from bad decisions they've made. I think, as Luke touched on there, the out half decision was a big one. The hooker decision could really come into focus this week. Obviously, the kind of Mbonambi Curry thing is still being decided upon, or we'll see what happens there. But as good a team as they are, I do think they've been a little fortuitous in certain aspects of their march to the final as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's been an awful lot of things that could have blown up in their face that didn't quite. We talked for, I suppose, months before the tournament about the goal kicking issue. It really only has cost them against Ireland so far, which they will say is a game that didn't really matter, which is true, I suppose, given that they're in the final and Ireland aren't. The hooker thing is again been bubbling along since Malcolm Marx was injured. We saw the initial struggles in that game at the set piece as well, which you didn't have the option of changing it at hooker in the same way that you had the option of changing it at out half when it wasn't working, and really in lots of other positions as well, because there was whatever you think about the validity of the substitutions, the success of the substitutions, or even whether the substitutions are hiding errors in selection from the initial run-on team. The thing about them was they were brutal in the way that it seemed like 2 mistakes and you were gone. Like, there was no room for sentiment there beyond Libic. I think taking Manny Libbok out of the game wasn't surprising given everything that has gone on around the out half position for them. But, to bring off Etzebeth, who is probably the best lock in the world on form at the minute, like after so early in the game, we've sort of got used to seeing them take Khaleesi out. But, Etzebeth, I think it was a knock on he had, just before, and then he's gone. So to change so much of the team and just so, I suppose, the key components of the team on the fly, but it's one of those things where because it works, Erasmus isn't getting any flack for it, and I suppose he would say, why should he? But the fact of the matter is that if you're having to make that many substitutions on the fly, it does speak to potential errors in your initial selection, like whether it be Pollard or whatever. Like, they didn't pick a team to play the conditions, and they didn't pick a team, I suppose, to counter what England were always likely to do. The interesting thing this week for the final is going to be that probably the team that they put out there against England is better suited to playing New Zealand than the one that finished against England. But, what do you do with the likes of Libic now, who you've presumably dented his confidence to such a degree that you have to start Pollard, even though theoretically the type of team and game that you were going out there against England and almost thinking that England were going to let you play that game and the conditions were going to let you play that game is actually far better suited to this weekend.
Yeah, it's a really interesting selection debate you raised. I want to bring in Rudd now, because Rudd, I don't think I'm misrepresenting you if I say that I think you feel that Razzie and Jacqueline Amber and the South African coaching staff, you've been maybe more on board with some of their left field thinking than myself and Luke Cad, just talking to you off air and stuff. But what's your assessment of what we've just been touched on the last couple of answers?
It's winners writing the history, isn't it? I mean, you can flip the Libbok Pollard thing and say what a brave coaching call to take off your starting out half after half an hour. I do think Pollard, because he's coming back from an injury and has played very little rugby in the last 6 months, they're not sure he can go 80, and they want to have him on the pitch to kick that penalty at the end rather than have replace him with Libbok. They'd see him at the moment, like if he was fully fit, and maybe he is now. Maybe after doing 50 at the weekend, maybe they start him because it allows them to bring another forward onto their bench, because they can go 6-2 if they start with Pollard. But they were a bit panicked on Saturday. I like watching them from our vantage point, seeing Felix Jones kind of scurrying down the steps to get the message to their subs to go and warm up, seeing Razzie patrolling the touchline like a GA manager, just before half time. The conflab that I think a lot of people picked up on in the coach's box, where they were all turned their back on Nienaber and Razzie's kind of addressing them all. But I do think the way they structure their bench, it works for them. They are always stronger at the end of games than the opposition. Even when Ireland beat them, they had them all on the 5 meter line, and they had, it didn't work out for them. But they even learned from that. Like the way they scored their try was a very similar situation in the same corner, and instead of going to the maul, Dion Furry carries unbelievably well, and RG Snyman goes over, and they haven't credit. Like Snyman would start every other team at this tournament, and there's a few others on that bench who probably in the olden days would have started, but now they see that they want to finish with their best team, and I do look. I think South Africa were absolutely on empty going into this game on the back of the France game. I see this as a massive missed opportunity for England, because I think South Africa made a mistake by starting the same team again. They should have rotated the squad. If Etzebeth just never brought the energy that he normally brings, so I think that's a mistake. They have made mistakes along the way, but then there's some of the stuff they do is really interesting. I think from an Irish rugby point of view, what they're doing with Dion Fury and Bongi Ombanambi, we're seeing Ombanambi and Jamie George going 80. So you have a starting hooker and you have a replacement hooker. So Ireland have two of the best hookers in the world. Do you have to bring them both? Can you get them both on the pitch? Can you put Dan Sheehan on the bench and bring him on at 6 or 8 for the last half an hour, and you have that energy from a different position? He doesn't have to scrummage. It's just they're challenging the way we think about the game, and I like that. They're playing to their strengths. The mark from the scrum from the mark thing is like, they've done it 2 games in a row. They've won a penalty from both scrums. You can disagree with it, but it's interesting. Luke obviously doesn't like it, but it is a tactic, and it's worked for them over 2 games now. And it especially worked at the weekend. They wouldn't have won the semi-final had they not done that, because with Rúaidhrí, they got kick in the previous one, and then they went for it. So, like, I'm really interested to see what Nina Aber brings to Leinster, and whether some of this stuff kind of bleeds into what he's doing there, and what he challenges the way we think about stuff. But I think you're overall, to sum up, like, they made mistakes at the weekend, but I did like the fact that they were willing to bring off big players to fix those mistakes and get over the line. And I think at the end of the day, they've built a culture and they've built a mentality there that just seems so hard to break. Because most teams, 9 points down, like with 50 minutes ago, they look beaten. But there's something within that team, there's reserves within that team to get the job done by any means necessary. And it's pretty impressive to watch. You know, they didn't play well on Saturday night, but they got there, you know, and that has to be like an incredible thing to be able to draw on as you go through a tournament like this.
Yeah, Luke, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, no, like I actually agree with like a bit of it. I think they are. You know, I do think they are challenging things. I do love that they're out of the box thinking brilliant. Like the mark and the 22, I think is. I had less of a problem with the one on the weekend than I did in the one the week before. Like taking it. I still think it was too risky a play because I just believe that referees don't really know that much about what's going on in the scrums, and you're down to an interpretation. And they're getting the benefit of it because everyone thinks South Africa's scrum is stronger than everyone's, and it probably is. But it's still there's lots of different opinions on what happened there. Whether that was who was right, who was wrong. Did the referee make the wrong call there? And it was tricky, slippy conditions, so it was a risky call, I think. But I didn't have as much of a problem with that one because it's in the middle of the pitch. In the 5-meter channel, I rest my case on that one. Etzebeth, like they bite like Libok goes the week before for too much down the line, and France catch it. Like he's only gonna, like, if he's being conservative, he's only getting 10 or 15 meters on that thinking. So you know it's a line out on your 10. So I'm going back to that because I got rinsed all week by the South African lads, and I couldn't remember why I couldn't remember why I thought it was a blooper, but I remembered because I had to go. No, I need to rewatch that because they did get the pen, which I'd forgotten, but it was the next one where Etzebeth got the yellow card. Anyway, leaving that aside, I got that off my chest. I do think they have the best resources out of all of the teams, and that is the key point here because it probably means that they can, if they're fluid in their thinking, which they are, and they rectify mistakes quickly, which is definitely a skill. They have the resources to bail themselves out, and that's the key thing with this. South Africa have the best team; they've got the best amount of good players. I think out of everyone to select from, and that's the kind of key point with this South African thing, and that's why I think they're probably not as good as everyone is saying they are. But their player group definitely is as good as everyone thinks it is, and I think that's probably why they've been able to get away with it a little bit. But I do like there's definitely some new thinking there on lots of different areas, and I would say the most impressive thing watching from a distance with the South African management is definitely the man management, because they seem to be able to take guys off. Like, to my mind, Etzebeth's probably the second best player in the world after Dupont at the moment. When he's fully charged up, and I think he didn't seem to have that much of a problem with going off in 45 minutes. And I bet you Libok won't have a problem too. That seems to be Rassie's biggest skill to me, is he's able to do these things to big players for the benefit of the team, and they all seem to be rowing in the same direction. No one is sulking, no one's on the bench not cheering for the team. And it seems to be kind of genuine, I think. And that, to my mind, is the biggest skill of this South African management team, is that they seem to have the squad all pulling in the same direction. Even if they make mistakes, guys are keen to get in and help the team. And guys, if the coaches think someone's not the right guy to get the team over the line at the end of the game, they don't seem to be sulking on the bench. I don't think you could say that about lots of other teams, big players. And that seems to be a real skill they have. So just on that point, that's probably what I think about the management team anyway.
Yeah, and just to that point you make at the end about, rowing in the right direction, to give Rudd a bit of credit, his question to Sia Khaleesi to sum up Jack Nienaber's contribution after the game at the weekend. He kind of spoke a lot about the man management skills of Jack Nienaber, how he cares about, the lads as people rather than just as rugby players. And, what Rudd was saying there, that like Rassie seemed to be doing a lot of the coaching during that game. And I was texting you about it, Rudd, being like, what actually is Jack's role in terms of like when he comes to Leinster, are we going to see a lot of this left field thinking, or is he kind of just there as the head coach, but Rassie is ultimately dictating everything? Like, it's an interesting one. It's hard to know from the outside.
I think they're a partnership, and I think Rassie is the kind of Rassie is the manager, and Jack Nienaber is the head coach. And Nienaber, his former defence coach, is a strategist. He's a thinker. He's really close to the players. He probably is the softer edge of Rassie's sword, and Rassie is the more.
He definitely looks more erratic personality wise.
But like Rassie's such a big character. Like I think like Rassie dominate. I think any organization Rassie's in charge of, when he's in the room, people defer to him, and that's just the way he is. And Rassie's a good coach as well in his own right. Like his record is very good, but I think Nienaber is the, like, he's come up with that defensive system is one he designed, and it's the players absolutely swear by him and what he brings. And the lads at Munster who I've spoken to about him have incredible time for him as a coach. I mean, when I asked Steve Cleese that question, I was thinking about maybe a quiet feature down, Wednesday, Thursday. What will Jack Nienaber bring to Leinster? I wasn't expecting that it would basically be a gift to every rugby Twitter or Instagram account across the world. Like, it was it was a 3-minute soliloquy. It was like a best man speech rather than an answer to the press conference. So it was really like Khaleesi's so impressive, and like I think there was a real genuineness to what he was saying as well. I think he really feels that way about Nienaber. They've been working together since they were 18. So what he brings to Leinster is I think he's a brilliant rugby mind. He's different to Lancaster. I think he's different to Leo Cullen. He's different to anything Leinster have had before, and that's good. Like I like the fact that they're challenging their own. Like they've been so successful week to week anyway. Maybe not in terms of the trophies they've brought home and at the end of the sharp end of the season the last couple of years. Maybe they needed a bit of something different, a bit of rootlessness, a bit of South African, those qualities that we see in that Springbok group, just to kind of get them over the line. I don't know, but there is also a risk that you're bringing in the finest mind in South African rugby for 2 or 3 years, and he brings home all your ideas in a couple of years' time as well. There's always that. I mean, you hear these people speak about South Africa and how much they love it, how much it means to them to play for the Springboks or manage the Springboks. It's going to be tough for him to leave that environment.
Yeah, I saw someone point out, a South African on Twitter, that Leinster went with a 6-2 split at the weekend. Was it coincidence, or did Jack have a word with Leo? But I think they've done it a couple of times before, to be fair. Jonathan, the scrum issue is something I want to discuss with all of you. Obviously, kind of Matt Williams' comments on Virgin, I don't know if you would have gotten them up there, like in terms of, the scrum is too influential. Should the scrum
have the internet in Belfast, Will?
I was going to say, try as we may, we can't avoid these things.
Matt Williams crosses all borders. Matt Williams cannot be contained.
He's not geo-blocked.
Former Ulster coach Matt Williams, to give him his full title.
But I'm sure people have seen it. But anyway, Matt Williams is kind of making the point that the scrum is too influential. The penalty is too big of a kind of a reward for a go forward scrum, and too big of a penalty for a scrum going backwards. What's your take on the whole debate? Are scrums too influential in deciding games? Should that be looked at, or are you happy with the way things are?
I think it's mad. And I don't want to single out Matt Williams, because it wasn't just him. Like the discourse on this around social media and stuff, which essentially boiled down to my team lost because of scrum penalties, so I'm upset, so let's get rid of the scrum. I just think it's nonsense, because what makes rugby unique? So what are the parts of rugby and the elements of rugby that you don't get in other sports? And the scrum is a big one. I think a huge part of it is the narrative around the scrum. So if you think about across other sports, you would never get people going on TV as experts or analysts and saying, that's not a part of the game that I have any idea about. That only happens in rugby, and it only happens in the scrum, where people are like, oh, it's the dark arts, or it's not my area of expertise, or whatever. That wouldn't happen in any other TV sporting broadcast.
Jonathan, I was having this exact conversation with my barber last night. I was like, nice. I think I was, no, seriously, because it's such a good point that you make. I was literally going, I said to him, look, I don't know of any other sport where a person has played at the top level and literally played the game since I was 5. My dad actually played in one of those positions, so I've been talking about it for years. I said, there's no other sport in the world where someone like me would have no idea about such a big part of the game. Sorry, I had to say that because I was just having this conversation last night. It's mad, isn't it?
Yes, but so it becomes this thing that mystifies people, but the idea that it's not entertaining or that it's not compelling viewing, I don't understand that, because the fact of the matter is that it's something unique to rugby that you don't have in any other sport. It's competitive, it's a battle, and it, to me, is what makes rugby this idea. And you can say that maybe this is like a played out cliche or whatever, but this idea that rugby is a sport for people of all sizes and shapes, like, you take that out of the game if you take away the scrum. Like, in what other sport are we having, I suppose the second most important game to be played in a 48-month span, which a World Cup semi-final, England against South Africa, was. And at the end of it, you're talking about a player, Oxen Shea, who's made a whole life, built this image of salads don't win scrums. Like, that's not an athlete that we're talking about in any other sport after a game like a World Cup semi-final. But it's something that you can have in rugby because of the scrum and because of the specialised knowledge and specialised position. So I don't know why you would want to take away something from rugby that is unique to only rugby, because then you're just making it more like other sports. And especially if you make it more like rugby league, you're making it like more like a less successful sport. Like, even the business model to me from that doesn't make any sense.
Can I ask you though, just to follow up on that? Like, I think the question, my take from it is probably that, is there a case for, where there's a little bit of uncertainty that you do go with the short arm and you take the free kick? Is there a bit of a case for that versus, I'm loath to include any more kind of layers for a referee to have to interpret on the fly in a game, because it's just such a complex and technical game as it is. But is there a case for that where, like, because we're looking at it on Twitter, there's people breaking it down slow-mo and going, oh, well, actually, it looks like South Africa were around there. It looks like England were around there. And these are people who actually play the position, so-called experts, like having, hours to dissect it. Or not hours, but like, probably looking at something for 10 or 20 minutes, this scrum going. Like, I saw Flatman describing it, and he actually thinks the referee got it right. But he was saying, oh, you shouldn't look at the satellite kind of look at view of it. You should look at the side-on view of the scrum, and that really tells a tale. So to my mind, that tells me, like, how is the referee supposed to really ref that? Like, that's really difficult. And why does he have to be so definitive on it? Why can't he say, okay, that's definitely a pen, I can see that one? Or he goes, do you know what? I think they have the edge. I think I'm going to give that a short arm. Is there any case for that, Jonathan?
I just wonder, does that neutralise the point of it anyway? Because the free kick is so much less valuable than a penalty anyway. But I think what you're touching on,
all the guys are usually tied in there anyway, Jonathan. Do you know what I mean? If you think about when you take a quick tap off a scrum, if they were a little bit more lax about where the scrum half could take the tap from, those 16 guys might still be in there. Is there any, just to tie in that point, just to say, because I think they could probably sort that out.
Yeah, and I do think, especially what you're saying about the sort of different angles of the scrum, because I think that's something that gets completely lost in this discourse as well, about how difficult it is to referee. Like, there's no value in looking at above angles, because that's not the angle that the referee has. And the other fact of the matter is, still shots, again, the referee's looking at something that is like moving again, so that's pointless. And then you have to remember that the referee only has the view of one side. So it's really, really difficult for the referee. But I just think that its value to the game is something that's worth persevering. It's worth trying to find a solution, rather than this idea that we should just decrease the importance of the scrum, which in turn will decrease the importance of prop forwards, which in turn changes the game massively, more akin to rugby league in my mind.
Yeah, Rud, like, what's your view on it? Like, I agree with Jonathan in terms of the uniqueness of it and the battle of it. But then, as Luke makes the point, like, some of the decisions, if a scrum is going straight forward for 10 metres, everyone can kind of be like, oh, that's a dominant scrum. But when it's kind of going sideways, everyone's kind of scrummaging at angles and penalties are being given. And they're open to 50-50 interpretations, which I know a lot of rugby is like that anyway, but this seems to be even more magnified because, as Luke and Jonathan said, it is an area that is probably the most inaccessible to someone coming to this sport. Like, I can see why people are looking at it being like, is that kind of is that a worthwhile punishment for the crime, when it's very, very hard to tell what's actually going on?
Like, Ireland, New Zealand was majorly influenced as a game by scrum interpretations by referee, and it's funny that it's come up in the Irish discourse this week rather than then. Like if Irish people were really going to get upset about scrum refereeing and all that sort of stuff, they would have probably done it last week. I mean, I didn't come away from the Stade de France on Saturday night thinking about whether the scrum should be devalued or depowered, or like it's only kind of subsequently that it became a topic on Virgin, that it's become this thing, and like it's caused me to think about it. But I mean, how many free kicks do you give before it's a penalty? So if they give a free kick in that scenario to South Africa, what are they going to call? Well, they're hardly going to put an up and under over. They're going to call another scrum. So they win a penalty off the next one. Surely you can't keep giving free kicks. They had dominance. I mean, ultimately they have a better 8 for scrummaging and better props on the pitch at the end of the game than England. They're using their resources appropriately, and they're playing to their strengths. And it's up to England to match that. And that's where I just don't see it as being an existential crisis. I think you can improve the scrum. You can set it quicker. You can tire those props out much more if you set this. You don't give them a 2-minute rest at every scrum. I don't understand why it is that we all have to stand around waiting for these lads to get ready. Just do it. Get them ready. Like Saturday was a really slow game. I mean, I was much more aggravated by the fact that England at every opportunity were stopping the game. That someone would go down and take an eat. Like the English medics spent more time on the pitch on Saturday night than Manny Libbok. Like they were on it every break and play, and South Africa were doing it too as the second half went on. And you can guarantee they were getting messages from the coach's box on as well as they did it. I mean, that's like cut that stuff out. If you have to limit it to one water break in a game and no, you're not on any other time, fair enough. I don't know how you do it, but like it's like football when players, goalkeepers are going down with head injuries so that they can get tactically briefed halfway through games. It was so. I hadn't seen it in any of the games I've been to subsequent or previously, but on Saturday night, every time there was a break and play, an English player went down on one knee, and they brought on management and they brought on water. It was just breaking up South Africa's flow. That's a much bigger issue to me. Like the ball and play time is this stat that we get thrown at, and obviously Friday night's ball and play was much higher than Saturday's, and Saturday was a better game. But I think most of the time you want a higher ball and play, and one of the reasons the ball and play is so low is that we're spending so long setting up scrums. So rather than depower them, just make them go quicker. And like if the ball's at the 8's feet, get them to play it. Like I know that's a choice. You can keep it in and try and drive it, but like they've been better at that sort of stuff. I just don't see it as being a major. It's become this talking point that I didn't anticipate. Sometimes these things crop up and they become these things. I don't see that as an existential threat. I think if you want to improve the game, go ahead with the scrums. Just make them pack down quicker. Watch videos from Luke's dad's time. They just basically bound up and scrum. Like it wasn't.
There was 50 or 60 a game though.
I know, but there's no reason. I've played in the position. There's no reason why binding and everything. It's just they're taking a break. Speed it up. That will make the game better.
Yeah, it's really the last thing I'll say on it is like whatever about it, whether you disagree or agree with the point. Like the people are hammering Matt Williams for suggesting it. Like that's good television for me. That's a good talking point. Like
he's entitled to his opinion.
Yeah, of course he's entitled to his opinion, but like it's also good television and good talking points. There's a amount of people on social media, rugby people on social media, who are the biggest twats. Like you wonder what their lives must actually be like when they're not tweeting absolute garbage. Like because like Matt Williams saying that and the thing he said about the 7-1 split, for me that's like interesting TV. Like, do they want these like kind of omatrons on television just spouting like these buzzwords?
To my mind, it's kind of in the South Africa kind of new thinking, like trying to improve the game. I agree with you. I don't think there should be no problem with him trying to be innovative about how what he'd like to see or what he thinks other people would like to see too. I completely agree with, but I mean, there's no point in delving into what's on social media. I think we all know what's there, No,
but these are from this is coming from people. It's not just coming from Twitter eggs. It's coming from people that, quote unquote, would have standing or
there's a lot of front rowers are kind of were like, oh, hold on a second here. That can't happen, But it's funny, isn't it? Like I think there's loads of things that you could do to help out. Like you could reduce the number of subs. Like not being able to empty your whole bench might be something that could, speed things up a little bit there. As Rory said there, I think the breaks and play and being able to how you stop the game. The scrum is actually a perfect time to do it because it's so specialist. Do you know what I mean? Like you can't just put someone in there because they get hurt. But other than that, I thought the same thing myself. It was kind of ridiculous. How England were kind of gaming it as well. So there's loads of things that go on in their game that actually I think, like even the offside line to me, that they still haven't really resolved that and got major input consistently from touch judges. I think that's a way bigger issue than the scrums, and I completely agree. I think if you depower the scrum, you don't get the bigger guys on the pitch. The bigger guys aren't on the pitch. then it's very hard to find holes when the game is quick, and when you do get a quick game, because they're the guys that generally get exposed there. So, yeah, there's no way you want to see it go in the rugby league way, where you're having to take guys, you're having to reduce down the numbers from is it 13, I think, in league, isn't it? Like that's the route you have to go to find space on the pitch if you start depowering the scrum. So I just don't really think that that's an option.
It's just interesting, I think, that the two arguments have become conflated somehow. Like, because to my mind, it's exactly what Rory says. It's like scrums aren't boring and scrum resets are boring. The time in between scrums is what's boring. But I don't think the issue is with the actual set piece. People obviously have issues, as you're saying, like with the officiating of it. But I would struggle to see how anybody finds the act of scrummaging boring rather than, as we say, those reset scrums and all this sort of faffing about in between. Because at the end of the day, it was a fascinating element of Saturday.
Do you know what actually might be a good thing? Do you know what might be a good thing, though? So instead of, say, going to the short arms for some of the things, if people are slow to reset scrums, give a pen. That's, you know what I mean? That you could start doing those kind of things. That would really kind of sort things out there. You just move them onto a new patch, straight away. If there's some kind of reset and you don't know who's on top or who's made a mistake, move them onto the new patch so they don't skip. If they're not getting ready within 15 seconds, right, it's a penalty against you. Do you know what I mean? I think that could be, instead of depowering it, making it more powerful, because a fitter, stronger pack would be able to take advantage of you. Particularly if the, say, South Africa have the big strong pack, you could move them along a bit more quickly, and you might be able to get a few edges in there and make it more competitive. So there's problem is there's so many things to unpack with trying to figure out how you fix it. Like maybe there's nothing to fix. Do you know what I mean? Maybe that's just South Africa having a strength. England were very negative, kicked the ball in the air loads in the weekend, but that was a strength for them. I thought they chased the ball really well. They made it really messy. That wasn't great to watch, I didn't think either. So I don't know. You play to your strengths, don't you?
Yeah, to take it back kind of to an Irish angle or an Irish perspective, obviously All Black South Africa final on Saturday night. Ireland have beaten South Africa at this World Cup, came very close to beating New Zealand, which magnifies kind of the frustration of the opportunity missed. Like, watching those two semi-finals, and like Ronan O'Gara was kind of writing about this last week, I thought about how big a chance this was missed. Like, some of the coverage I haven't agreed with. There's been kind of a very sanguine kind of outlook of it in, they played really well, they're very close in the comeback, they'll be back, it's such a strong, set up with the young players coming through. For me, this is a massive opportunity miss. This was a chance to win the World Cup, and everything I saw at the weekend really reinforced that. Like, as I said, Ireland beat one of the teams, they've almost beat the other. I don't really have a question. I'm just kind of like throwing all those points out to you and seeing what you think.
I think it was a big opportunity missed, but I don't think they did it an awful lot wrong in missing it. They were beaten by the better team on the night in a what is being looked at as one of the greatest World Cup games of all time, and a team who have timed their run. And look, this is where you go back to your strategy and you go back to everything. I mean, New Zealand, who had a much easier draw, a much easier schedule, managed to time their best performance for the moment where they were under the greatest pressure, and Ireland didn't. Ireland, who had a much more difficult pool, I think peaked in the Scotland game. Actually, I think they brought their probably best performance against a team that probably didn't need to bring their best performance against, and then couldn't back it up a week later. New Zealand didn't have to back up their performance a week later this time. They emptied it against Ireland, and then they just had to show up last Friday night. It was a desperate game. Whereas South Africa, I think we saw what France took out of South Africa. Like, South Africa were shattered of themselves and nearly lost to the worst English team we can all ever remember, who played well on their big emotional high. And I think if they'd held on, would have really struggled to back it up against the All Blacks with a day's less preparation. And I really think Ireland, a couple of things on Ireland, the 17 in a row actually means you're not fixing the mistakes you're making along the way. If you're winning, they should be more ruthless about it. But I think by nature of things, if you're winning, you're maybe not as ruthless in your analysis of the game. Look at what South Africa did. They were held up on the line by Ireland in the last play. This time they don't go to the same play in the World Cup semi-final, because they know in the same corner, they've been through it. If we get held up, we don't get the ball back. It's not you're better off peeling off. If the Ronan Keller hold up had happened against South Africa, maybe he doesn't peel off the next time. They're learning as they go. I think Ireland weren't as ruthless in their interrogation of those 17 wins as they would have been if they'd lost one along the way. But I do, and I think O'Gara made a good couple of points in his Examiner column. But at the end of the day, if you go back on the cycle and you go back on, they didn't do an awful lot wrong across 4 years. They did most of the things that we would have wanted them to do. They just didn't have enough depth in certain positions, didn't have enough faith in their bench, and at the same time they were so close. And had Kelleher dotted down and they held out, we wouldn't be thinking about it this way. And that's why I've been reasonably sanguine about it, because it was, you lose big games sometimes. You lose big,
Yeah, and I think
great
as well,
games
Rod,
sometimes.
to tie in with that as well, like, if New Zealand's run is perfect because the time of the tournament is great for Southern Hemisphere teams. If you don't have like a really hard group to get out of, you're just kind of tweaking. Like these guys have been together for. Now that's a challenge too, that they're together for a long period of time. But you're not trying to play. You've kind of been playing recently enough. Like the last time all the Northern Hemisphere teams played was kind of Feb, March, that kind of period of time. So you're kind of trying to find form. So everyone was kind of giving out about Farrell having to play the team, and the minutes the guys had to play. The guys had to play those minutes because they had to play themselves into rugby fitness. Whereas the New Zealand guys, tapering for them was actually probably a good thing. That kind of way they had figured, and as Rudd said, I think that point about the France game, that really helped New Zealand. It simplified things for them. You know what I mean? They needed to sort out their ruck ball. They needed to get, their defense, I think, has been really rock solid. And they look like really clear and about what they're trying to do there. They've really figured something out in that respect. And it looks like they had a chance to get a bit of confidence back into that attack after what was a really stuttery one against France, where if you look at the difference in the ball handling for New Zealand against Ireland, that, bar the first like kind of 5 minutes, I just thought they were way more accurate than they were against France. They were a complete mess. So they got to fix kind of 3 areas, I think Rudd said, and like if you think about Ireland as well, I think another reason why they didn't get lambasted was because, I think they got a bit unlucky with some injuries as well. Like Henshaw, Ryan and Keane Healy were pretty unlucky. I think that would have helped quite a bit, I think, in that game. And I think what's probably got overshadowed, the other point I agree with Rud's on, pretty much repeating it here, but I just think in the Scotland one, I think everyone thought they'd fixed the line out, but they pretty much went to 2 all day, didn't they? Like, I thought that really got exposed against New Zealand. That's something that I think that probably overshadowed some of the other issues that Ireland had in the game. And I think because they played so well in open play, I think everyone was kind of, that was because I think that's probably a harder thing to deliver. Maybe in hindsight, no, but I think it's harder to deliver those skills. And I thought they did those things brilliantly well. They just got exposed at the set piece, really, and some big defensive mistakes, which probably didn't get really exposed against the Scotland team. They just really weren't able to do it. So there's a load to unpick there. But I do think, you have to look at it overall and say, well, look, there was a lot of things that kind of worked against Ireland at that one particular moment. And at the end of the day, it was 17 in a row is still unbelievably impressive. And I think it was always going to be really hard without some kind of negative feedback somewhere along the way to go, do you know what, there's a real issue there, and that could really stop us against a team that we're going to be pretty close in ability with.
Jonathan, anything you want to add from an Irish perspective? Like, the lads have brought up some interesting points there.
Yeah, the thing is that I agree with what both of you are saying, but I do wonder if you're talking about ruthlessness, would that type of ruthlessness not be applying a forensic eye to what you could have done better? Like if you look back to 2019, there was this massive appetite afterwards for the review and what was going to come out of the review, and there was really this huge public discussion about what the results of this review were going to be. And I think if you talk about New Zealand and you talk about South Africa, and I'm not saying that Ireland aren't going to do this, but I think those rugby nations and countries with that psyche wouldn't come out of a World Cup where they lose a quarterfinal and just think, well, a few things worked against us. I think those types of countries would still be applying that forensic eye and looking at what went wrong and what they could have done better, what they should have done better, because what you're saying, Will, about everybody being quite sanguine about the whole thing, that wouldn't fly in South Africa, that wouldn't fly in New Zealand, because there's no acceptable way to lose a quarterfinal.
Can I ask you just to that point? So, what if Ireland get that maul try, and New Zealand lose that game, and like in fairness, 95 out of 100 times 3 forwards breaking off 2 meters to the line. A hooker shouldn't get held up by a first set. Like I think they were pretty lucky to get out of there. Personal opinion. I know they were very good, but that should have been a try. What happens if they lose that by 1 point? Like, do they kill themselves? Do you think they get killed?
They've already changed their coach.
No, but do they? Seriously? So, okay.
If I can come in on that one first. Like, Ronan O'Gara made the point that Ronan Kelleher's decision-making there, he said, was kind of indicative of kind of a white line fever or a knockout rugby fever throughout the game. He said that the reason that chance wasn't taken was kind of a broader kind of point from the performance generally that...
Well, like no one's saying that the RFU shouldn't do a thorough and forensic review of everything that's happened in the last 4 years. No one's saying you shouldn't learn from this and get better. That you should, like, no one's saying stand still. It's all grand. I mean, it's not a situation where you would go, call for Andy Farrell's head on the back of losing a game by 3 or 4 points. I think it's calm, rational analysis of what's gone on, and like that's the thing. It's not like 4 years ago. 4 years ago was a record defeat in a quarter final. It was a massive non-performance, a complete no-show. They were scoreless in that game for 68 minutes. They were terrible. All of them reserved one of their worst performances for Ireland for the biggest moment. I mean, I don't think you could say that about a team who found themselves 13-0 down. And yes, you look into all the reasons you find yourselves 13-0 down, but they managed to battle back from that position. And then they they got close, and then they got knocked back again, and they came back, and they went through 37 phases at the death of huge accuracy to get to that point with massive fatigue. And I just don't understand how you could say how you could kind of heavily criticize them over that. I think you review it calmly, and you look and you say, yes, it was a massive opportunity. Yes, they'll have massive regrets, but I don't see the value in hammering them over, because I don't think it's a hammerable, for want of a better phrase.
Like,
you seem to want us to hammer them.
I don't want
take it easy, Jonathan. Have a heart, would you, for God's sake?
No, see, I think it's more, and even if you go back to the conversation that we had last week, I don't think any of us are actually arguing opposing points. I think we're actually just arguing adjacent points. Like, I don't think any of our opinions actually diverge that much. Like, I think we can all probably sit here and say Ireland got the World Cup to a 7 out of 10. And I don't think it's like, 4 years ago where you're coming back saying the World Cup was a 2 or 3 out of 10,
We'll want the players to refund his ticket to Paris. And he wants Andy Farrell. He wants Farrell in stocks outside the Aviva.
But I do think that there is something to be said as well for, like, reflecting on why you had a good and not great performance, or why you were beaten by a team that, while the opposition played really well, that we all believe that Ireland were going into that game as a better team, which the evidence of that is the fact that every one of us predicted that Ireland were going to win. But I don't think we're all as far apart on this as maybe it sounds like we are. I think it's...
Yeah. But I just think that Ireland are getting more credit for coming back from 13-0 down than they are people questioning why they were 13-0 down in the first place. That's just my interpretation of having read and listened to a lot of coverage since the game. Like, I feel like they're getting more credit for getting almost there than they were for saying, well, hold on a second. We were saying this Ireland
they should have won the game without playing well. They still, like, they put themselves in the position to win that game, even though they didn't play well. Like, they got refed off the park on the, and then he might have been right, by the way, at the scrum.
But is that a good thing, or should we be saying why didn't they play
better?
But
I'm just saying, right? So you're going to have games. You're playing against good teams. Not everything is going to work for you. That's they're going to do some good stuff too. And no one's disputing that point. I'm just saying it's an obvious thing to say, but it should be said. So there are going to be points in the game where they're going to play well, and you mightn't play so well. And that's probably, look, the 13 points, I agree, there was some poor play in there. Like, the first penalty is an absolute stinker, particularly when they got off to a very shaky start, like throwing passes everywhere, like, all that kind of stuff. And there was some bad play there, but they still got themselves in a position to win that game, and probably should have won the game, Will. Like, there's a missed penalty. Now, I know Barrett missed a penalty too, so they nearly cancelled themselves out. But that maul was definitely, we were in a position, we should have got that try. Like, I don't know, that seems to have been kind of brushed over, like, in my mind, in some of the kind of discussions about the game. Like, for Foster to say that he looked so smug and like comfortable after the game. I was comfortable with 37 phases. Like, yeah, but you probably should have lost it. Like, Ireland really should have got that try. You should have been chasing the game at the end versus the other way around. So I think that's kind of an important point in all of this, is that they probably still should have won the game against a team that played very well. And I think that's probably reinforced my opinion to think that they probably were a better team. But look, on the day, like very fine margins, and that's probably why you give them a little bit of slack. I think is that you have to give the others a bit of credit, but also, they still should have won it even without playing well. And that, to my mind, is a sign of a good team, honestly.
Well, if it happened in a semi-final rather than a quarter-final, would you? And we covered it the same way. Would you feel the same way?
I would, because winning the tournament is where my head is at. Like, obviously, the quarterfinal thing is very annoying just because they've never gotten past it and you have to listen to all the stuff about it. But for me, it's about winning the tournament. As I said, the two teams in this final, Ireland could beat either of them. I know that. So the fact that they didn't deliver, and they reserved one of their, I would say, most off-color performances of the last 2.5 years for that knockout game.
But if you played, I mean, if you played Ireland's games between the top four teams, if you played them all in a series across a league campaign, like, they would knock each other off from time to time. Like, Ireland had to do it more, play to their best more frequently in a shorter period than any of the other teams had to do it in the quarterfinal, because they had to knock off the number two team or three, I can't remember what they were, South Africa and Scotland, before they got to New Zealand, and they did it in a shorter period of time. And I do think that's very difficult to do. And I think if you replayed Ireland New Zealand at the Stade de France on Saturday night, you could get a very different result. I think you get a very similar game. Ireland could get out to 13 points, and New Zealand would have to fight back. But I think they're capable of it as well. I think, like, you can only account for so much of your own performance. The other team will come and punch you in the face, and it's how you react to that. And Ireland reacted very well on the night. Yes, they have to get greater depth. They have to have a loose head they can trust to bring on with 20, 30 minutes to go. They have to. I don't think you can be going 80 minutes with a 38-year-old at half in big games in the future. Like, there are things they have to learn from it. But at the same time, I thought it was an honourable way to exit a tournament. I think on the night, I actually don't think New Zealand would have been ripped apart in their own media for, maybe they would, for coughing up a 13-point lead in a massive game. But the way the game was built beforehand, Ireland were the favourites going into it. So I thought those two games were so close and so tight, and that fine margins phrase that I hate is so applicable that yes, review it, yes, go through it, but I just don't see the need to rip into it. I thought it was they did a lot of things right on the night.
I just think you have to allow for the nuance of it, like, you can talk about performance anxiety and you can talk about pressure having an impact on a game without calling a team bottlers, and you can say that New Zealand played well, and you can say that, as you say, Rod, the fine margins went against Ireland, while also looking at, as Will says, the fact that Ireland were not at the level that they have been over the last 2.5 years in what was their most important game in the 2.5 years. I think an awful lot of the discourse around World Cups sort of gets almost catastrophized, or becomes this hysteria about it. And I just think the answer is in the middle ground, because all of these things are true, essentially.
Yeah, like, I don't think that it requires a review of the 4 years picking all that apart. Because I agree with Rudd. I wouldn't change the build up the 4 year period. For me, it's about how they delivered that specific performance, and whether there was, maybe some World Cup knockout anxiety that contributed to it. That's where my head is at, rather than some sort of ripping.
I think you review everything. Like, it's the best resource team.
You do, but
it's the best resource team that's ever been sent from these shores to compete in any international competition, and they didn't get what they wanted. So you do go into it, but you do it calmly and, independently. Like, what will happen is that David Nucifora will employ someone from within the RFU. Well, certainly this is how he's done it in the last two World Cups. And at some stage, probably just before Christmas, when everyone's focus is elsewhere, we'll be brought into RFU Towers, and he'll sit there with the review under his hand, and he'll give us his interpretation of what the review was, but we won't actually learn what it was. And that's where, like, 4 years ago, Joe got the blame, and then the McNulty got the blame. Like, that's the official story of how Ireland lost the World Cup 4 years ago. I can guarantee Andy Farrell's not getting the blame this time. So I genuinely don't think I think the review will be very sanguine itself, probably more sanguine than we've been.
That word is getting a great outing. I think I saw the word of the day calendar this morning, and
can't stop using it.
Been pushing it out ever since. Okay, let's finish up just with a look towards the final then, Luke. Just a quick kind of glance at it. Like, who's in the driver's seat? You think it's already very close in the bookies? I think New Zealand are marginal 1-point favourites at the moment, but it is set up to be a great game.
I think it is. I think New Zealand have got their stuff together. I think I still feel like they might struggle against that South African pack, particularly in the front row. Like, I thought Ireland would have a serious edge there. Didn't turn out to be the case. I thought they played brilliantly against Ireland, but I just think the South African team is just it's a different challenge to Ireland, I think. And South Africa place more emphasis on it there. So I think they'll be targeting that, and they're kind of perceived to be really strong in that front eight. So I think it'll be a very different battle for them than it was against Ireland, even though I think they might be outmatched by both teams, depending on obviously the Mbonambi thing. I still think, though, if the weather is kind of decent, I think New Zealand have a great chance. And I actually think they might be edging it slightly. I think the extra day of recovery might play as well. I think it looks like some of the old heads as well, their bench looks stronger than maybe I thought it was. I thought Whitelock was brilliant. I don't know whether he starts or not, but he was brilliant, I thought, against Argentina. I'd say he probably will, because, the line-out was so good against Argentina. And I think their backline is really purring again. It looked to me like they've kind of simplified things down a little bit. And and I think their kicking game as well. I think Smith is playing outstanding. So I'm going to say New Zealand by. Yeah, I think the point sounds about right to me. This thing could obviously go either way. I think South Africa have had a bit more of a wearing trip through the tournament, and I think it might just be one game too far for them, even though that pack will cause massive challenges for this New Zealand one. I just feel like I might have underestimated how good that New Zealand pack is. I think Kane is playing brilliantly. I think Sevilla is playing brilliantly. And I think that front row isn't as bad as I thought it was. So I'm going to say New Zealand by a point. It's really difficult to call it, and you could make a strong case for South Africa either way, and I wouldn't fight you on it either. But I just feel like the rest might be the key thing here.
Yeah, Jonathan, what's your view on it? Like, you mentioned the selection issues for South Africa earlier, which is fascinating. Like Luke's point about the buy-in and whether Lebach would be willing to, or not willing, or kind of mentally kind of able to slot back in, is an interesting one as well.
Especially because if he doesn't get that buy-in, then what do you do? Because you don't want him to be on the bench if he's not going to start, because you don't want him and his goal kicking in the last minute of a game. So if you don't have Pollard to come on and kick that penalty as he did in the 70th minute against England, then what you do there becomes massively interesting. I think the selection is going to play a big part in this game. It's fascinating to think about the different ways that Rassie Erasmus and Jack Nienaber can go with this, especially because so many of the substitutes did come on and make an impact. Even Oxenche came on and essentially won that game. Do you start him? Do you have him on the bench? But I think, speaking now before we know the teams, I just think, and I didn't think this would be the case at the start of the tournament, but I think that New Zealand are just coming in with more left in the tank. Like, I actually thought that them playing France first up would actually work to their detriment, because I thought they would come into a quarterfinal undercooked, but that obviously wasn't the case. South Africa went to their bench early as well, but because New Zealand were able to bring an awful lot of key men off in the 55th minute, they're going to be fresh. So they've got the extra day as well. So I just think that the way the tournament has panned out for New Zealand in terms of the schedule is enough of an advantage for them to overcome what I think in South Africa is a better team, but I think New Zealand are going to win.
The tight games are more mentally taxing as well, I think, aren't they? Like, it's probably worth mentioning that it's not just the less days. I think, like, the stress of that going down to the last minute, like, that takes it out of you as well, Will, week to week, if you're in those kind of nail biters. So I just thought I'd mention that, because I think Jonathan makes a great point on that.
It means that South Africa have essentially played 4, if you like, live games throughout this tournament, with Ireland, Scotland.
One match of note that they've had to win, basically. They've won one game and they're into the final, and they had a handy enough week last week. And South Africa not only have had to play those challenging matches, but even just the kind of, the injuries to the squad, the discourse from the out half, the hooker, like, that's all kind of noise and stuff. Whereas New Zealand have had a fairly, quiet tournament, obviously getting that great win against Ireland. So yeah, those kind of juxtapositions are interesting. Rud, the Parisian correspondent, you'll have the last word then. Are you still in Roland Garros?
I'm back in Roland Garros. I haven't been here for a few days. I was just watching. They have basically rolling. It's the same footage. I said the people who are here all the time must be sick of it, but they basically work great World Cup moments. And I've just been watching Gianni De Beer dropping his 5 goals against England at the Stade de France, and could Handré Pollard get to that point on Saturday night? I wouldn't put it
Just to
past
cut
him.
across the road, I remember when the draw was being made.
No
Ireland
Irish, not
Do we
a
get in now? Is
no,
there another? Do we get in
nothing.
for the next one? Do you think?
I'd say maybe you might see some of the footage from Ireland, New Zealand, but it won't be favourable towards Ireland. You never know. Like if South Africa do this, having played against basically all of the other teams in the top four plus Scotland and England, like that's an incredible achievement. That's probably the hard. I know they didn't beat Ireland, but it's probably the hardest World Cup anyone's ever had. And to come through with a 1-point win over France, a 1-point win over England, and then to beat the All Blacks in the final it'd be stunning. I do think they've gone to the well a lot, and I'm not sure what's left. And they kind of dangled a selection change before the England game. It didn't go with it, but they put up Kane and Moody and Esther Hazen in the media on the Tuesday, I think, and then they went with the same team again. I wonder, do they regret that, and will they pivot a little bit this week? Will they bring in Pollard to start and bring Jean Klein onto the bench for just a bit of extra beef on that bench and go 6-2? You know,
Faf, do you think Faf has to come in?
like I think Faf's a better player, but then Faf has made the turnover in the last play of both games. Like this stuff of having your best players finishing is working for them, even though they seem like maybe you start them, you don't get yourself in a position where you need them to make that play.
That's the other argument.
So you know, again, it goes back to that thing we were talking about at the start. Like it's been, you know, it's the Victor's writing the history. I think New Zealand have way more in the tank, but they don't have as strong a bench. It's certainly in the tight five. I don't think Tamale Williams has been good in the knockouts. I didn't think he's a massive man, but he's very inexperienced, and I didn't think he was this good. And I wonder if you get him up against a Vincent Koch or a Trevor Nkayane, will he be able to handle that? You know, and it's not just Inche and Koch and Bongion Manambi. It's the power coming through the second rows as well, and all 8 scrummaging together. That's a really difficult thing to handle. And like New Zealand were smarter than Ireland at the scrum, but they weren't better than them. Like they were, you know, they got a couple of dodgy enough penalties. They manipulated the picture that was being shown to Wayne Barnes, and they got the result. And that's a big reason why they're at this point. But they're not a great scrummaging team. South Africa are a much better scrummaging team. The familiarity is a big thing. They play each other all the time. They know each other really well. You know, it's the oldest rivalry in maybe not the oldest, but it's the most storied rivalry in international rugby. And New Zealand got one over them in the game in the Rugby Championship, and then South Africa obliterated them in Twickenham. But I don't see that happening again. I think it'll be tighter. I think I'm leaning towards New Zealand, based on their freshness and their schedule, because I think South Africa have just had a lot taken out of them. But God, you're going to have to work hard to beat them, because they're just never gone.
Well, it's set up to be
Will, last man.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I actually think New Zealand as well. Are we going for New Zealand clean sweep? That seems
dangerous. That worked out well last time, didn't it?
That seems very dangerous.
I think South Africa are a better team.
Yeah, I agree.
But I think New Zealand. I think the schedule. What we've learned over this tournament is the best team doesn't necessarily win. The team who's had the easiest schedule often helps along the way, because England are nowhere near South Africa, but because they hadn't played a game at the World Cup really, like they were able to time everything for that semi-final performance.
Weather and a good kicker for a crap team, like that always helps.
And freshness, kicker. Like they didn't have to exert themselves to get to that point where South Africa were.
That drop goal from Farrell, like we're not talking about that, but Jesus, we should have been like that. How they kind of blew that opportunity, but what a semi-final he had for a guy who's been under the cosh for a while.
Yeah, to be fair, a lot of the English stalwarts did stand up. Like Atoje had his best game, I thought. Courtney Laws, I thought, was brilliant. Kind of got lost kind of into the ether now that they lost, but I did think, to be fair, some of the guys that you'd be wondering where they've been for the last couple of years, I thought gave massive shifts.
Yeah.
So who you're New Zealand clean sweep for New Zealand is the call, is it?
And then we can put everything in.
I'm kind of doubting myself. I don't like that we've all gone for them, considering it's so tight. Like, it's surprising that all 4 of us are backing them, but I don't know.
And now we can put everything into the 2026 Nations Championship, which is what it's all about now. Once this World Cup is over, we can all focus on the big one.
No quarterfinals in that competition.
Yeah, all roads lead.
Quarterfinals are bad. The Irish rugby team's only request: no quarterfinals.
Well, we might pick up on that Nations League next week after the World Cup, when we do maybe a deep dive looking over the tournament as a whole. But for now, I'd like to thank Rory, Luke, and Jonathan for joining me. Hope everyone enjoys the World Cup final. We'll be back later in the week with another podcast previewing in even more depth the big game on Saturday night. Until then, thanks so much for listening, and goodbye.